And here we go. So, fantastic. Let me see if you can see the lecture. Screen, share, share. Here we go. Okay, guys. So basically, the second part of the lecture is a little bit anatomical, and then we're going to cover the feminine, the female reproductive organs, right? And the following one, in the last module, we will cover the menstrual cycle and fertility. So it's important to understand the anatomy, because the anatomy has an impact on the general reproductive cycle and the menstrual cycle. So we're going to start with the gross anatomy of the female reproductive system. The same as in males, the reproductive system is controlled under the hypothalamic pituitary axis. In this case, the hypothalamus pituitary ovarian axis. And in the same as males, there is a double function. Obviously, one is general reproduction, which is important for the survival of the species, but also it has other impact on the production of sex hormones, sex steroids, in this case estradiol, and also we're going to study them, but they have also other functions, not only as a feedback, negative or positive, in the pituitary gland, but also are important in other physiological functions. The menstrual cycle and the contraception will be studied in the other lectures, and I want you first to study the anatomy of today before we go in the second part of the lectures, because the second part of the lecture of the reproduction can be a little bit complex if we do not understand the anatomy. So when the class finishes, you just need to learn the anatomy, okay? So as I said before, the male reproduction system compared to the female is very different. In women, it's more complex. Why? Because female need to get pregnant, need to have a baby, need to be fertile, need to have a cycle of ovulation. All this is controlled under endocrine balance and endocrine system. So this is more complex than in men, okay? But obviously, women have all the work to do during the pregnancy, right? Because there will have to be the implantation of the embryo, and they will have to go through all the pregnancy, okay? We will start with the anatomy of the female reproductive system. So what we have here is the female pelvic anatomy. And as you can see, we have the vagina here with the opening, the uterus, the cervix that gives rise to the uterus, and then the fallopian tubes, and then the ovary. And in each side, we have one ovary and another ovary. Okay? Now, the ovary produces the eggs or ova, which are the ones that will travel through the fallopian tube once they are maturated, and upon fertilization, it will end up in the uterus, and the embryo will implant in the uterine cavity to form, obviously, the future baby. So the uterus itself, right, it's formed of a very, very important cell layers, which are called endometrium and myometrium. and basically they are very important for implantation of the fertilized embryo into the wall of the uterus. The ovary, as I said, is the one that will produce not only the oocytes, but also is the one that produces the sexual hormones that will be important for the feminine cycles, right? And two of them are progesterone and estrogen, which are the most important ones. This is more the external, and we have the internal orifice, the cervix, and the external orifice. So if we look into a closer look of the female anatomy of the reproductive system, what we can see is here an ovary. In the other side, we have the other ovary, right? So they have two ovaries. And what we have in the ovary is that it is connected through the ampulla or the fallopian tube, we can see here. And then if we continue, it goes into the isthmus of fallopian tube and into the intramural portion of the fallopian tube to end up in the connection of going down here, right? It will go into the cervix of the uterus. Okay? Just 1 second, because they are sending me WeChat. Okay? So we have the cervix here of the uterus and the vagina down here. Sorry, guys. And the vagina. And here is the bladder. Okay? The corpus uterus, you can see it here, and then the round ligament, obviously, and it's very important because there is contraction of these anatomical structures. We have the myometrium here inside, and the outside endometrium, the second ovary, and the fallopian tube. Okay? Within the ovary, okay, there is the production of the oocytes, and we will study this carefully. So also the connection of the ovary with the ampulla or fallopian tube is the fimbriae, which it connects with the and the infundibulum of the fallopian tube. Again, the ampulla, and here in the ampulla is where the fertilization takes place, and then once the embryo, the oocyte is fertilized, goes down the isthmus of the fallopian tube into the intramural portion of the fallopian tube, and so on into the uterus. Okay? So if we look at the ovary itself and the formation of the known follicles, okay? So this is a cross section. And if we start, okay, at the beginning, this is the ovarian lineman, okay? And this is secondary lineman of the ovary. And basically you have here the production of the all the basically formation of the future oocyte that will be expelled after each cycle, menstrual cycle. So this is the final one, but if we go to stepwise, it starts here with some cells which are called primordial follicles. Okay? The primordial follicles, the cells around it grow in size and form the primordial follicles growth, okay? And then it forms the primary oocyte. The primary oocyte has in the external layers the granulosa cells. These granulosa cells are important for the secretion of hormones, which we will study. These granulosa cells divides, makes them bigger, and then it appears the antrum. You can see here in blue the antrum. And it gives rise to the secondary follicle. And in the secondary follicle, what we can see here is a structure like an egg, and here will be the future follicle. Okay? You can see here in the middle, and it's surrounded by granulosa cells and antrum. What happens next is that the antrum grows in size, and also the granulosa cells grow in size, and we have the secondary oocyte surrounded by the zona pellucida. At this stage, this gets in contact and is already the oocyte ready to be expelled in the cycle. So this opens, the vesicular follicle opens and releases the oocyte, which is composed of these layers: ovulated secondary oocyte, zona pellucida, and the corona radiata. Now, what happens with this is that basically in the cortex, this degenerates and forms the developing corpus luteum. The corpus luteum will secrete hormones which will influence the the menstrual cycle. Okay? Very, very, very important indeed. This will form the corpus luteum, and you can see here the corpus luteum, and at the end of the cycle will degenerate and form the corpus albicans and disappear. Now, all this process takes a month, and it's tightly regulated by hormones which produce the menstrual cycle of the female. We will slowly be covering this because it's a little bit complex, but we need to understand first the anatomy, to understand then the hormonal process, to then understand the menstruation, which we will see in the next class. Now, which hormone does? Obviously, the ovaries. The testes have to function, right? To produce a sperm for fertility and reproduction, but also it produces androgens, testosterone. But the ovaries produces the eggs or the oocyte, but also has its role on production of sexual female hormones. And the two potent hormones that it produces are the estradiol, that comes from the granulosa cells of the secondary follicle, and estradiol is also known as E2. Okay? and progesterone or P4. Estradiol levels and progesterone have a big cycle during the menstruation cycle that will impact on the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland to produce FSH or LH, and it will cycle through the fertility time of the female to produce oocytes for reproduction. So here we have the ovulation pattern, but in a much more graphical way. Okay? It's not inside of the ovary. Here it's outside. Okay? So we have the oocyte, and the oocyte we can separate it into primordial follicle. Primordial follicle is growing, secondary follicle, and then the secondary follicle will be in this stage here. Okay, this is the secondary and it's formed by layers. Okay, so let's go by step. Oocyte surrounded with some cells. These cells are granulosa cells. These granulosa cells divide, and form this structure with the oocyte in the middle. Then these granulosa cells keep dividing and the antrum starts being apparent. The antrum forms and it gets bigger, and then we have what is called not the secondary follicle but the Graphene follicle. The Graphene follicle is almost ready to expel the oocyte, and it's formed from a layer of cells outside called the theca, the granulosa membrane in yellow, and because the antrum has grown, cumulus ophorus, which is the neck. This will go into the membrane and expel the ovum or oocytes. Now this will go back, invaginate, and would form the corpus luteum. This process of expelling the ovum or oocyte is the ovulation and will be preceded by the menstruation in females. The corpus luteum does have a function in endocrinology because will produce hormone that will then dictate the cycle and will prepare the uterus for future implantation of the embryo if fertilization occurs. So, we've done the gross anatomy of the reproductive system. But as you know, this is controlled through the hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis and with female sex hormones. So again, what do we have is the hypothalamus, which will generate gonadotrophin releasing hormone. The gonadotrophin releasing hormone is secreted into the portal vessels and will activate in the anterior pituitary gland the production of luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulated hormone, which in turn will produce estradiol and also progesterone, the female sexual hormones, very, very important. It also will produce inhibin and activin, which they will have both negative but also we will see at certain levels positive effect. But normally they will have a negative feedback on the GnRH and LH-FSH of the anterior pituitary. We have here the same schema, but a little bit with two different options. Not today, but the next class, you will see that the levels of estrogen, right? Normal levels of estrogen have a negative feedback loop on the pituitary to secrete FSH and LH to actually signal into the ovary. The same happens with the hypothalamus, which has a negative effect. However, during ovulation, there is a high levels of estrogen generated by the ovaries, and if there is a past threshold of estrogen, the inhibitory effect is broken and can be activated to produce more FSH and LH. As like with the human male hormones, inhibin also has a negative effect on the pituitary to produce FSH and LH. This positive and negative feedback loop, you will understand it when we do the session of the menstrual cycle. So hypothalamic drive. So again, is the same as in humans. Gonadotrophin releasing hormone is a pulsatile, and basically there is a GnRH pool generation, drives episodic secretion of LH and FSH, luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulated hormone. There is a desensitization of GnRH. There are differences between pulses and surges. Pulses is within hours differences, and surges is between days or weeks, okay? And we will see that there is a big surge of LH generation for the menstrual cycle, the last 3 days, 36 hours. Now, hormonal control of the ovulation, GnRH causes the secretion of follicle-stimulated hormone and luteinizing hormone from the anterior pituitary. Follicle-stimulated hormone stimulates the ovary follicle to secrete estrogen, the very strong female hormone. LH stimulates the ovary, right? And LH has a role in the corpus luteum to secrete progesterone. Okay? So the corpus luteum secretes progesterone. Estrogen and progesterone exert negative feedback to suppress LH and FSH and GnRH secretion. However, as you will see, too much estrogen and too much progesterone can activate, but we will study this tomorrow. Also, we have inhibin exerts negative feedback to stop the production of FSH. So we have talked about the two cells, two gonadotrophin model, right? So there are two types on the model of follicular esteroidogenesis. Remember, esteroidogenesis is the production of steroid hormones. In this case, is sexual steroid hormones, okay? And as I've told you, if we go back to the follicle. Remember that the follicle is formed by the membrane granulosa in yellow, okay, and also it's formed from the theca cells, which are here around it. Can you see? The theca cells and the membrane granulosa. And they will secrete different hormones depending on the enzyme that is available. Okay? So, what we have is the theca cell that uses the cholesterol and generates androstenedione. Androstenedione goes into the granulosa cells and it has the enzymes to form estrogen and estradiol. And estradiol is the potent hormone of the ovary and feminine ovarian sexual steroid hormone. So we have the theca and granulosa cells, right? But they are almost in contact. And estradiol goes into the blood to obviously have an impact in other organs. Both the cholesterol to androstenedione in the theca cells to the granulosa cells is divided between two different susceptibilities to two hormones. So LH stimulates the theca cells to produce androstenedione, whilst FSH activates the aromatase conversion of androstenedione to estradiol. Okay? So the receptor is available in the theca cells for the LH receptor. For the FH receptor is in the granulosa cells. So this will occur this way. Can put cholesterol to progesterone, and it goes from the theca to the blood, granulosa, cholesterol, progesterone, estradiol, and to the blood. Sorry, here should be also FSH. So let's look into the two-cell model of ovarian estradiol. Okay, so in this case, right, remember the granulosa cells also are, the granulosa cells are susceptible to both FSH and LH, right, but not the theca cells. Okay, a more complex, it's here. Okay, remember we studied the enzymes in the lecture number 23 and 24, so you can study this again to have all the enzymes. Basically, we have here the theca cell that will obtain cholesterol. Cholesterol will be transformed to pregnenolone. Pregnenolone will be converted into progesterone. Okay? And this to progesterone to androstenedione and also to testosterone. Now here there is no aromatase activity. Now androstenedione will cross to the other cell, okay, the granulosa cell, but has the enzyme like the 17 beta HSD and the aromatase, right, which is responsive of the FSH stimulation, and will convert it into testosterone, estrogen, and through aromatase change estradiol, and then this one to estradiol, and then it will go into the blood, the stream, to exert their function into the hypothalamus and into their pituitary gland. If we go a little bit higher up, the cell granulosa also has the LH receptor through cyclic AMP, and also can be a source of cholesterol to progesterone. Okay? Now, it does not catalyze this because it does not have the 17 hydroxylase, 70 desmolase activity are absent. Okay? So please go back to the lecture like this one in lecture number 23, 24, where we studied the enzymes of steroid synthesis, because those part is the part that we didn't study. It's happening in the reproductive system. So with that, my friends, I think we're going to leave the lecture here. Okay. What I want you, or what I need you to do, is to study these two types of cells and to understand which hormones produce. Okay. The reason is that after this, we're going to study something a little bit more complicated, which is the menstrual cycle and the fertility. So you need to understand the anatomy and the anatomy of both male and female to be able to understand. So this one, production of estradiol and progesterone, very important to understand the cycles, and also the feminine and the masculine anatomy, so we can understand the fertility and also the cell cycle ovulation, which we will study in the next 2 hours. That will be on the Sunday. Okay? So for today, that will be it. And thank you very much. Okay? And then I'm going to send a link for those that want to have any questions. And then we will have the last session, which we will study the fertility and we will study the menstrual cycle. Okay? Thank you very much for your attention and thank you for attending the class.